I recently finished reading Heretics of Dune, the fifth book in the Dune saga by Frank Herbert, and I really enjoyed it. So let's get into my review. Heretics of Dune jumps forward again from God Emperor of Dune quite a good bit. I think it's like 1,000 years. And basically a lot has changed and a few things have stayed the same. There's still some of the main houses, the main sort of factions inside of the world of Dune that are fighting at each other and at each other's throats. But there's no longer like a strong central power that is keeping things together. It's a lot more like everybody's at each other's throats. So this story ends up being a lot more cutthroat, a lot more trickery and treachery and backstabbing, and you're not even always sure who's on whose team. And so that makes the whole book a lot different than, say, the previous book. Now, this book largely follows the story of the Bene Gesserit. They're dealing with the fallout from when essentially mankind spreads across the universe for a while, and they multiply in crazy amounts, and evolution happens, and all kinds of crazy things happen, and then they start coming back, and they want to consolidate power, and so there is kind of the beginnings of a war between the Bene Gesserit and the Ixians, and all of them that remain basically in kind of the old empire, versus to some extent the people who are coming back and forming new alliances with new ships and everything else, and kind of like what's going to happen next. Heretics of Dune as a book felt a lot more like the early Dune books to me. It was a lot more action oriented. There was a bit of mystery, there was intrigue, there was a lot going on in this book that was less, how you say, preachy or boring. In that way, I enjoyed Heretics of Dune quite a bit more than I did God Emperor of Dune, or even probably book 3. I would say I kind of enjoyed the first Dune book maybe the most, and then the second probably second, and then this one's probably a close second, maybe tied for second with the second book. I enjoyed the characters quite a bit. Again, a bit more than the previous book, and also probably a bit more than the third book. The characters in this, like one thing that this book does that's nice is there's not Paul Atreides or his kids or his grandkids or their empire kind of running everything. And not that I disliked those characters, but I felt like their story had kind of run its course. And so Heretics of Dune kind of follows a different thread and a different group of people, and gives you a little bit more of a backstory on the Bene Gesserit a little bit, which is cool because they're kind of viewed in a certain light as kind of the villains potentially, or scheming manipulators that aren't really to be trusted. And in this book, well, they're still kind of scheming manipulators that aren't to be trusted, but they have reasons and they're learning stuff and they're kind of like have their own point of view, which is fascinating. I thought it was cool to see that. I thought the characters were interesting. I'm not going to talk too much about them because I hate sort of spoilery reviews, so kind of talking more at a high level, but I will say that like the main characters and the basic through line of the plot worked pretty well and was a lot more entertaining than maybe some previous entries. One thing about this book that I really enjoyed is I liked that it went past Paul Atreides and the whole Atreides family. There's still plenty of like Atreides house allusions and the old empire stuff, but it's less like hitting you over the head with it like there were in the previous books. Another thing that made this book a lot different and I think a lot more interesting is Dune's books 1 through 4 really revolved around future telling and prescience, I don't know what the right way to say that is, and the idea of a messiah figure. Those books relied heavily on that, and heavily on the notion that basically history and whatnot is to some extent predetermined, or you can kind of like step into the line of, you know, what's going to happen and kind of see it and so on and so forth, and kind of all of the trouble that causes. And that was cool, but by the fourth book, I feel like it really had run its course. This book really stepped away from that, at least to the most part, and that I think was good. There's still some of that in here, but like by the end, it's dramatically less, and it doesn't feel as contrived after a certain point as the previous books. And this also feels like it's stepping a little bit away from this sort of like Dune formula that so kind of like the series is built around. I think if they had done some version of like, hey, there's a kid or a grandkid or some weird fourth generation relative somehow that snuck their way in and they now have the magic powers, I think I would have lost my mind. But luckily this went a different direction, and that really kind of maybe saved the series and made it a lot better and more interesting. Overall, I would say that Heretics of Dune is a good read if you enjoy the previous Dune books. Obviously, I would say it is worth reading the first Dune book, and if you like that, continue on. If you get to books, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, and you're still enjoying them, yeah, you'll probably continue on like I did to book 5, and you'll probably enjoy book 5 a lot more than book 4. So that's my thoughts on Heretics of Dune. Book 5 is a good read, is a lot of fun, and it felt like one of the more entertaining Dune books that I've read.